Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Kristen Welker in Washington, where President Trump is once again escalating his threats against Iran as the human and economic toll of the war rises. This morning, President Trump attending the dignified transfer of 4 U.S. service members killed in the Middle East over the weekend. President Trump, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dan Kane, can be seen saluting as the bodies of the fallen were transported off the plane. President Trump speaking to reporters ahead of this incredibly solemn event, suggesting the fallen soldiers all supported the war.
They are indeed great heroes, actually. They said, and all of them said very strongly, we cannot let Iran have a nuclear weapon. They won't have a nuclear weapon. So we're going to honor them. And one of the hardest things to do, for me, it's one of the hardest things to do as a president, but has to be done.
Just hours before that, the president issuing a new threat on social media, warning Tehran that every time it shoots at a ship in the Strait of Hormuz, the U.S. will bomb and destroy one bridge or power plant in Iran. The U.S. has now launched strikes on Iran for 11 consecutive days, despite the administration saying Iran's military capabilities have been eviscerated and the war is over. President Trump today insisting public support is on his side.
Well, Americans aren't against the war. A poll just came out. Americans don't want high gasoline prices, but they're not against the war.
And yet every major reputable poll shows the war is unpopular with the public. Meanwhile, the administration's strategy in Iran remains unclear, including what it would take to de-escalate and get the U.S. and Iran back to the negotiating table. Secretary of State Marco Rubio was pressed on that point today. Take a listen.
Is the U.S. strategy to strike Iran into submission? And why do you think Iran is not giving in right now?
Well, look, the United States is, Iran's in a lot of trouble. Ships are trying to go through the straits and they're getting blown up. Commercial ships are going through the straits and they're being blown up. The United States is defending that shipping and, in addition, is targeting the places that are launching against those ships to continue to degrade Iran's ability to target and harm global shipping. We remain open to diplomacy. We remain open to working it out in a negotiated way. But right now, they don't seem to be serious about that. And so we're going to continue to protect shipping.
Now, here at home, fuel prices continue to rise, with the average cost of gas above $4 a gallon and oil prices picking back up, closing today around $87 a barrel. Joining me now is NBC News White House correspondent Monica Alba, NBC News senior national security correspondent Courtney Cubie, who is at Dover Air Force Base for that dignified transfer, and NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Julie Sirkin. Thanks to all of you for starting us off. Monica, let me start with you at the White House. We are hearing this new threat that I just talked about from President Trump. So take me inside your conversations. What is the administration, what are officials there saying the strategy is to get Iran back to the negotiating table?
Well, so often, Kristen, throughout the course of this military conflict, we have seen examples of the president really using his social media platform as a way to sort of try out these threats from a rhetoric perspective, escalating that kind of language without necessarily following through. We have seen that as a sort of pressure tactic that the administration has used. But of course, this does raise the question about whether this is something they would actually go through with. And given those comments you just played from Secretary Rubio and from the president himself, they are still talking about this potential path to diplomacy. But I have to tell you that every time they've been bringing that up recently, it doesn't seem like there's anything that's actually moving the ball forward on that. In fact, this really feels like the administration continues to be stuck in a place where it's still figuring out what might get Iran back to the negotiating table when Iran doesn't seem to have any appetite or urgency to do so, Kristen.
No, you're absolutely right about that, Monica. And when you see those images at Dover Air Force Base today, few images are as powerful, potent as a dignified transfer, an incredibly solemn event. President Trump there, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, as we were just discussing. How is the White House, how's the president dealing with the human toll of this war, Monica?
Yeah, the weight of this responsibility is perhaps never more clear than on a day like today for the president and his administration when they are there physically to meet with the families who did agree to have media coverage of this dignified transfer today. And this is a president who participated in several of these transfers in his first administration. This is his second dignified transfer this year so far. And there was a moment in which he acknowledged one of the families happened to be from Georgia, and when the president let them know that he was going to be headed there after he attended this dignified transfer for a political event, he says, according to the White House, that he offered them a ride aboard Air Force One, and the family members took him up on that, traveled with him down to Georgia, and even attended this rally that you're playing there on your screen right now, where the president again acknowledged them, thank them for their contribution, and of course for the fallen service members' heroic efforts in this prolonged conflict right now in the Middle East. So that certainly does weigh on this administration and on the president, who acknowledged all 4 service members today as heroes. Kristen.
Just an extraordinary detail there, Monica, and we are monitoring what President Trump is saying in Georgia. We will, of course, bring any newsworthy comments to everyone who is watching right now as we get them. But Monica, let me ask you about the midterms, obviously looming very large over all of this. President Trump was asked yesterday how it's factoring into his thinking, and he really downplayed any impact, right?
He's been pretty dismissive of that notion overall. Remember, a few weeks back, he, of course, really made headlines when he said that he didn't think about Americans' personal financial situations when making decisions about Iran. But he's seemingly making a similar statement this week and saying that, yeah, he may not be the one who's on the ballot in November, but certainly Republicans who are worried about this issue being a problem for the GOP and for holding the House are worried about what kind of factor it may play. Kristen.
All right, Monica Alba, starting us off on an incredibly somber day at the White House. Monica, thank you so much for that reporting. Courtney Kube, let me turn to you. You are at Dover Air Force Base, where that dignified transfer took place. What can you tell us about these service members who were transferred today?
Yeah, sorry, we're out in front of Dover Air Force Base now. It's a little bit loud here, but I can tell you that that was not the case inside the dignified transfer today. It's a very quiet and solemn ceremony. We saw 7 U.S. Army soldiers go into that C-17 and one by one carry out the flag-draped transfer cases of those 4 fallen U.S. Army soldiers. You know, Kristen, a lot of our viewers may not realize this, but when you go to a dignified transfer event like the one today, the military is very particular about the rules for media and anyone attending. As reporters, we're not allowed to get any audio on the video showing the event, and that is in large part to protect the family members who are there. But I can tell you, I was standing not too far from some of those family members, and it's just gut-wrenching to listen to them when they see the transfer case come off with that flag on it. It's the first time that their loved one is back in the United States after giving that ultimate sacrifice, and it's the first time that they are seeing them back here in the United States after learning the horrible news that they've been killed. It was 4 Americans, 3 killed in Jordan, 1 in Iraq, and one of those individuals, a sergeant who was injured and missing initially in Jordan, is still waiting to be positively identified by the DNA testing here at Dover, Kristen.
You're right, Courtney. The images are just so incredibly powerful and hard to watch, quite frankly. The president, of course, today, as we're talking about, threatened to strike bridges, power plants in Iran. Does the military have the legal authority to strike those targets? What are your sources telling you there?
Yeah, so it wouldn't be the first time that the military has struck infrastructure during the course of this war with Iran. And basically the way that they can make these legal strikes is by finding locations that would be considered dual use. So potentially a bridge or a facility where the military, the Iranian military or the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, uses that location in support of their military efforts. So, for instance, if there's a bridge where the IRGC is moving equipment or logistics or supplies or personnel, whatever it is, in support of attacking commercial shipping in the Strait of Hormuz, that could be considered a legal and legitimate military target. So the question is, are those the sorts of things that President Trump is talking about here? We've been watching to see. There has been pretty consistent activity in the Strait of Hormuz, in and around, but so far we don't have any reports of any activity since he posted that Truth Social earlier today, Kristen.
Courtney Kuby with your reporting from Dover Air Force Base on an incredibly somber day. Courtney, thank you so much for joining us, for giving us that viewpoint. We appreciate it. Julie, let me turn to you. The war escalating, obviously, as we said at the top of the show. We know that Democrats have been critical of the president from the start, arguing that he's acting outside of his authority, given that he hasn't gotten congressional approval. What are you hearing from Republican lawmakers? Are they starting to lose patience with the fact that this war is now dragging on?
Kristen, privately, they have been questioning and testing their patience all throughout this war, but it does not seem like the unfortunate addition of more service members to the count of the service members that we've lost, now 17 since the start of the war, Kristen. It does not seem like that is adding any momentum, at least publicly, for Republicans to say, you know what, now is the time where we challenge the president's authority on this war. Look no further than the dichotomy we're seeing right now with that supplemental package, $95 billion of additional funding the administration says it needs to not only continue its fighting in Iran, but also replenish some of the munitions, the stockpiles that they've been using over the course of the 5 months. Democrats that I've talked to, Kristen, say we would be open to looking at that, but the problem is they would like Republicans and the administration to at least give them a vote, a say, as to whether the administration has unilateral powers into continuing this, and yet Republicans find it easier to move that kind of supplemental package with only Republican votes than working across the aisle. So far to say, Kristen, that Republicans are not looking to push the administration any further than they have been, which hasn't been much over the course of the last 5 months.
Well, Democrats are expected to force another war powers vote this week. How do you expect that all to play out, Julie? What are you going to be watching for there?
Yeah, Kristen, they could vote as soon as tomorrow before they leave town for the week. Democrats once again trying to put Republicans on notice, particularly in the Senate. We've seen this effort succeed in the past, right? Not through that veto-proof majority, not that two-thirds majority that is needed. But certainly there has been some disgruntling on the Republican side. Kristen, I have to tell you, though, more than those 4 Republicans that we have been seeing, Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, Bill Cassidy, Rand Paul, for budgetary and war reasons. Of course, he's different than the other Republicans. I don't expect more Republican votes to join Democrats in that war powers vote, despite the fact that they've heard from Pete Hegseth this week. They've questioned him privately. A number of Republicans that I've spoken to, Kristen, want the administration to tell them their plan. But I think a part of this, too, is that Republicans feel comfortable having Democrats push the administration, asking the tough questions, while for now, even in the words of Leader John Thune yesterday, as recently as yesterday, Kristen, they are allowing the administration to continue to have latitude. How long they continue their patience for, that remains to be seen.
All right, Julie Sirkin with all of your reporting from Capitol Hill. Julie, thank you so very much. We appreciate it. As President Trump continues to defend his military action as a way to stop Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon, NBC News is learning the Trump administration is set to approve a landmark nuclear deal with one of Tehran's Gulf rivals, Saudi Arabia. Now, according to a senior administration official, the U.S. will support the creation of a civilian nuclear power program in Saudi, which could pave the way for Riyadh to pursue uranium enrichment. Asked about the expected agreement and concerns about nuclear proliferation, Secretary of State Marco Rubio said the administration would be seeking congressional approval for the deal. Look.
We have to do it with Congress anyways, so we'll certainly do it publicly. But suffice it to say, the U.S. is not going to reach any agreement with any country in the world that leads to the risk of proliferation.
And joining me now is NBC News intelligence reporter Dan DeLuce. Dan, thanks so much for being here. Appreciate it. So break down what you know so far, what your reporting is about this deal.
So at this point, they haven't briefed in detail, but yes, this is a plan to allow Saudi Arabia to develop a civilian nuclear energy program with U.S. help. Now, it is not adhering to what's called the gold standard at this point. There's no word that Saudi Arabia has agreed to sort of extensive UN inspections that would allow inspectors to look anywhere, anytime. And they've always been opposed to that. And that's called the gold standard, as I said. And it also would have banned uranium enrichment. There's no word that that's banned. And that's pretty interesting, because you just showed Secretary of State Rubio talking. Well, when he was a senator back in the first Trump administration, he was very outspoken about any nuclear cooperation agreement with Saudi Arabia that didn't meet that standard. So here's what he had to say at that point. Oh, sorry. You can read what he said. And he basically said, no way should there be any cooperation agreement without that standard.
And I'll read what he said. He said the United States should suspend all talks related to a civil nuclear cooperation agreement with Saudi Arabia until the Saudi government agrees to, as you just said, the gold standard requirements and proves they are willing to be responsible partners that respect the basic rights of their citizens. Again, this was Senator Marco Rubio back in 2018. And Dan, to this point, Saudi Arabia is basically saying, well, if Iran moves to develop a nuclear weapon, then we'll have to move to develop a nuclear weapon. I mean, how might this impact the stability in the region there?
So the administration will say this allows the U.S. to shape the program and not have Russia or China get involved. But critics and some lawmakers are saying this could open the door for Saudi Arabia to eventually have the know-how and to have a nuclear weapons capability. So it's a very controversial move, and one that Israel will have real reservations about, too.
I mean, the Biden administration was considering a similar deal as well. Is the Trump administration effectively giving up some of its potential leverage?
I think they lost some leverage here. I think that Saudi Arabia was not ready to recognize Israel, given the war in Gaza and now this current war with Iran, which they have a lot of reservations about as well. So I think it's an admission, really. The White House could not get that out of the Saudis.
What is the White House? What is the United States getting from this deal? What's the argument in favor of it?
I think the White House will probably argue this is a boon to industry. They want to have these agreements all over the world. And so U.S. nuclear energy and industry will benefit, and we'll have all these agreements all over the world. And I think the other argument they will probably make is that, would you rather have Russia doing this? Would you rather have China building enrichment facilities and so on? So I think that's the argument they'll make. And then they're going to face tough questions about what restrictions, what limits are going to be placed on the Saudis.
And again, Secretary Rubio is stressing it will require congressional approval ultimately.
Yes, although 2/3 vote to override a presidential veto on this one.
All right, Dan DeLuce, thank you so much. Great to see you. Appreciate all the really great information. Coming up, about last night, a duo of election deniers win the Republican primaries for governor and Secretary of State in Arizona. What it means for the battleground state in November. Plus, election security concerns as the Justice Department opens an investigation into how more than 6,000 non-citizens were registered to vote in New Jersey. And as election officials sound the alarm about gambling in the midterms through prediction markets. We'll delve into that. Stay with us. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. If it's Wednesday, we have election results out of battleground Arizona, casting a spotlight on the president's grip over his party and its embrace of his election conspiracy theories. In the Republican primary for governor, Trump-backed Congressman Andy Biggs overwhelmingly defeated Congressman David Schweikert. He will face incumbent Democratic Governor Katie Hobbs in November. Meanwhile, State Representative Alexander Kladen won the Republican primary in the battle for Secretary of State and will face the incumbent Democrat Adrian Fontes. Notably, both Biggs and Kladen have echoed President Trump's baseless and unfounded claims of election fraud, with Kladen leading several failed efforts to overturn the 2020 results in the state. If he wins in November, he would become Arizona's top election official. Joining me now is Bram Resnick, anchor and political reporter for our Phoenix affiliate KPNX. Bram, thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. Let's delve right in and start with Congressman Andy Biggs, this big win that he had in the primary for governor. You pointed out on your show yesterday that he hasn't ever faced a tough fight in what is obviously a solid red House seat. What are you going to be watching for? What do you think is required to beat Governor Hobbs?
Well, Andy Biggs has served for 24 years in Arizona's legislature and then the Congress. He has never had a really tough election. And in that time, just on a very conventional level, he's taken a lot of policy positions, cast a lot of votes that are going to get a lot of scrutiny, and it could be really tough scrutiny. So that's one layer. Then go to the next layer, which is how he handled the 2020 election. He refused to accept Arizona's results. In fact, he tried to overturn the election. He has been a consistent election denier. He apparently has not acknowledged that Katie Hobbs, the current governor, won her spot legitimately. And so also keep in mind in 2028, if Andy Biggs is elected governor, he would have to certify the presidential election results in our state. So we're kind of looking at things on all three levels. This campaign is just getting going, but you can expect a lot of those levels to develop as time goes on.
Do you think that Biggs has a shot at winning statewide? What would he need to do?
Well, he would need to distance himself in some way from Donald Trump. Donald Trump is underwater here in Arizona. He is a drag on candidates here and across the country. Hard to see how he does that. He's fully embraced Donald Trump, and so that's a challenge. He has to answer the questions about his positions forthrightly and to the satisfaction of many voters. So there's that. Plus, the most important thing, perhaps, is the Republican voting advantage. There's a +7 Republican voting advantage here in Arizona. That helps, gives Republicans a head start in some ways. The key to winning an election in Arizona is the independent vote, and Andy Biggs needs to win that, or at least do very well there, in order to win the governor's race.
Well, and that, of course, similar challenge for State Representative Alexander Culloden, who beat Arizona Republican Party Chair Gina Swoboda by nearly 20 points. We should note Culloden led several lawsuits to overturn the 2020 election. And again, he now wants to be the state's top election official. How is he weaving that into his campaign message?
Well, Alexander Culloden, since the 2020 election, was already a leader in the legislature in introducing elections-related legislation. And we have this striking kind of contrast on the ballot this fall. You'll have Alexander Culloden on the ballot running for Secretary of State. At the same time, there's going to be a ballot initiative that he drafted that voters will have to vote on in November that would eliminate mail-in voting, which is one of the most popular ways, the most popular way that we vote here in Arizona. But of course, on the other side, you have election deniers, critics contending it's rife with fraud. It's the potential for fraud is enormous. And here he is on the ballot, and he will get a lot of votes by mail while at the same time wanting to do away with votes by mail.
Well, let me ask you just before I let you go quickly about Arizona's first congressional district. Republicans have picked Jay Feely as their candidate, while the Democratic race is yet to be called. Tell us a little bit about this district and what you think it will take to win in November.
This is one of the wealthiest districts in Arizona, one of the best educated districts in Arizona. Jay Feely's profile fits it pretty well. I should let folks know he lives about 30 minutes away in another congressional district. Donald Trump nudged him into the first after a favored candidate of Donald Trump's decided to run in Jay Feely's district. So that's where we're at. Jay Feely is not a hardcore Trumper in the sense that he likes him. He's gone golfing with him, and has a softer touch when it comes to Trump. On the other side, Amish Shah, who is in the lead right now, he ran in 2024, won the primary, lost to David Schweikert, then a congressman, by 4 points. He's a pretty strong candidate. We're waiting to see whether the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee supports him the way it did his opponent, Maureen Gallon Woods.
All right. Well, a lot to watch. Brim Resnick, thanks so much for joining us 2 days in a row. We really appreciate it.
Thanks so much.
Coming up next, ballot battles and ballot bets. New Jersey and the Justice Department are headed for a heated standoff over a probe into the state's voter registration errors as officials raise the alarm over the use of prediction markets in the run-up to the midterms. We'll explain. Keep it right here on Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. The Department of Justice says it's investigating that incident we first told you about yesterday of non-citizens registering to vote in New Jersey. Governor Mikey Sherrill announced that the state had discovered roughly 6,600 non-citizens were registered to vote in New Jersey between 2024 and 2020. 2023 due to a software error, despite indicating they were not citizens while applying for driver's licenses of those around 400 cast ballots. Ahead of the DOJ announcement, Governor Sherrill suggested she would not cooperate if the federal government wanted to personally identify information about those non-citizens.
Be really the utmost in hypocrisy for the state to charge them when it's our fault. However, I would not put it past the federal government, so we are working very hard on ways in which we can protect people here in the state of New Jersey.
In terms of protecting them, does that mean that you won't release their information to defense or anyone else if it's requested?
We are not in the practice of releasing personally identifying information to the federal government right now, given that the Trump administration continues to weaponize it against people.
Joining me now on set is NBC News legal affairs reporter Gary Grumbach. Gary, thanks for being here. So what more can you tell us about the federal investigation into this incident?
Yeah, as you can imagine, Kristen, the Trump administration is not thrilled to hear about this mistake by the state of New Jersey and by that third-party software company. And they want everything. They want the 6,600 people's names. They want their nationalities. They want their addresses. They want everything about those people. And they want everything else about the 400 people in terms of that actually voted, when they voted, where they voted, and how they voted, which is a crucial part of this because the Trump administration has long been against mail-in voting.
Do you think that the Trump administration could take this to court? Is that where this is going to be settled?
It could potentially. They would have to sue, right? The Department of Justice would have to sue for this information. It does not seem like the governor of New Jersey is particularly interested in just passing it along just because the Department of Justice has nicely asked for it. So I do think the next step here is a lawsuit. I will note that the lawsuits have been filed all around the country by the Trump administration trying to get the voter rolls from all these states. 15 judges now in a row have said, no, you can't have them.
Well, and I guess the big question, President Trump continues to tout his Save America Act, and he's using this incident to double down on why he thinks it's so necessary. And yet the Save America Act, which calls for voter ID, for example, it overhauls election security in various different ways. Could that have stopped these folks from signing up to vote?
Absolutely not, because the Save America Act and this third party that had a software glitch have nothing to do with each other, right? This was a third party where the folks clicked no, they are not U.S. citizens, and because you can get a license in New Jersey if you're not a U.S. citizen. They said no, they're not U.S. citizens, no, they're not registering to vote. It recorded them as yes anyway. The Save America Act couldn't stop that from happening at all, Kristen.
Okay. Gary Grumbach, thank you so much. We'll continue to watch what happens. Really appreciate it. We want to turn now to another issue concerning election officials. The rise of prediction markets. Some election officials are warning the platforms which allow people to place bets on election outcomes could actually fuel distrust in an already contentious political environment heading into November's midterm elections. In fact, an analysis by NBC News finds election wagers are popular trading volume on Kalshi and Poly markets surpassed $197 million, with about half of those bets tied to governor's races. Joining me now is the reporter behind that story, NBC's Jane Tim, who covers election administration and policy. Thanks so much for being here, Jane. We really appreciate it. So we just noted that election officials are worried these markets could actually create more distrust. Tell us why and what election officials are telling you about this.
Yeah, so election officials, Kristen, are worried that the prediction markets could incentivize bad actors or just people, as they put it, doing things they shouldn't in the election process. Now, we know that America's elections, by design, are run by thousands of people across the country. There's a lot of poll workers, volunteer judges, people working for very little or for free. And the idea that someone might try and meddle in an election because they want to, win a bet. And these bets can be on anything from when an election might be called to what the margin of victory might be. And election officials are just worried that their system is vulnerable to people who might meddle in hopes of winning a bet. They also worry that if the prediction markets say one candidate's going to win and then someone else wins, it's yet another thing that's going to make people trust American democracy less. All of these things give them concern, and this is very new to a lot of Americans. And when I was at an election conference yesterday up in Boston, a lot of state election directors had more questions than they did answers about how to work with these. There are some guardrails that keep various people from, betting on things that they can affect the outcome of, at least according to these platforms. But nonetheless, this is very concerning to election officials who already, as we know, have a bit of a tough job.
Yeah, well, and some states are actually trying to crack down on this. Wisconsin yesterday warned voters can't bet on an election they're casting a ballot in. What has been the pushback there?
Yeah, the pushback was really big. Kalshi had a statement out calling it voter suppression, saying it's dangerous, worrying that people would choose not to vote so that they could buy contracts on elections, and therefore that it was suppressive and could swing elections. This is Wisconsin's law. They say that you cannot bet. It is a felony to wager on an election that you are voting in. It doesn't mean you can't gamble on elections or wager on elections in other states, but they have a strict restriction on this. Of course, you would have to catch them before they could count the votes, which at least some election officials I spoke to thought was a little bit unlikely. But nonetheless, there's definitely a ban. Kalshi and Polymarket, these places want people to be wagering on elections. It's big business for them. Kalshi launched an elections hub earlier this morning. So we're definitely going to see that tension continue as we get closer to the election.
All right, Jane Tim, thank you so very much. Appreciate that. Coming up after the break, can the Republican candidate who Trump supported to win over enough anti-Trump voters to become governor of a state the president lost by more than 20 points? Steve Hilton is going to try, and he joins us next. Stay with us right here on Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. Turning now to the race to be California's next governor, where Democrat and former Health and Human Services Secretary Xavier Becerra is facing off against Republican and former Fox News contributor and entrepreneur Steve Hilton. As the race enters the general election stretch, Hilton is out with a new and untraditional pitch from a Republican candidate. Look.
I get it. Maybe you hate Trump, MAGA, whatever. But life here has become impossible for anyone who isn't already rich. We are going to fix that.
And joining me now is California's gubernatorial candidate, Steve Hilton. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Of course, great to be with you, Kristen.
It's great to have you. So let's talk about what we just heard there in the ad. Sounds like you're trying to convince anti-Trump voters to vote for you. What is your pitch to them and to those independent voters who you need to win over?
That's exactly right. Everyone can see the lie of the land politically in California. I've always acknowledged this is an uphill battle. But the logic of this race is that we're going to get a change because a majority of Californians, 66% in the latest poll, say not just that the state's going in the wrong direction and that it's time for change, but that we need a total overhaul. However, it's also true that a Republican hasn't won for 20 years. The gap is very big. And so it's clear that there is a group of people in California who know that we need change, who think that gas prices are too high, housing costs are too high, taxes are too high, and we're not getting enough in exchange, but who are put off from voting Republican because they don't like the president, they don't like the idea of voting Republican. And my message is to say, look, enough is enough. Let's fix California, focus on the positive, practical things that we can do here. That's my plan, to make our state Cal-affordable. $3 gas, cut electric bills in half, your first 150 grand tax-free, starter homes for young families. These are practical things, not ideological things that everyone can get behind, and that's the message.
Is there one policy that you can identify where you disagree with President Trump?
Yeah, there's a number. I mean, one of the big ones. I mean, I don't know if you'd put it in the category of a policy, but I've been asked about whether the 2020 election, which is something that I've been clear when asked, who won that election. Biden won that election. Everybody knows that. And so that's a point where I guess you could say there's a disagreement. I've spoken out against suggestions, for example, that were made recently about withdrawing Customs and Border Patrol from California airports as retaliation for sanctuary state policy. I disagree with sanctuary state policy, but I don't think that's a sensible way to go. I don't like the idea of taking government stakes in our big AI companies and tech companies. That's been a suggestion that's been floated. I think that what people need to know about me is that I'm not an ideologue. I'm a pragmatic problem solver with business experience, as you mentioned, government reform experience. Prior to moving here in 2012, my wife and my sons, I was senior advisor to the Prime Minister in the UK, leading our domestic reform programs. And so I just think people need to know that I'm going to, above all, stand up for what the changes we need to make in California. But I appreciate and am honored by the president's endorsement. And I've said, I think it's a good thing for Californians to have a governor who has a good relationship with the president and his team so that we can get good results for our state.
Since you raise it and you've said you believe Joe Biden did win the 2020 election, as you know, President Trump delivered that speech this week in which he essentially tried to cast doubt on elections. Do you think that's the right message right now? Do you think that's what people want to hear about? Are you concerned it could be a drag on your race?
Well, I'm focused on our election here, and I do think there's a lot that we need to improve. And it's not just me saying that. I mean, the fact that it took over a month to get official results in California, even the New York Times editorial board wrote a very powerful piece on that, which I agreed with, that we need to improve the way that elections are run in California. I also pointed out that we were very vigilant in my race to make sure to reassure our supporters that there was nothing untoward. And we didn't see anything that concerned us in that way. And so I'm just focused on getting as many votes as possible within a system that I think needs change. Another really important point, we've got voter ID on the ballot here in California. It's not the same plan as the Save America Act that gets a lot of conversation, but I think voter ID is supported by a majority of Californians, and I think that is one step towards assuring people that our elections are things that they can have confidence in.
One of the big policy issues, as you well know, that's being discussed all across the country is Iran. I want to play something the president said yesterday about the war in Iran as it relates to the midterms. Take a listen.
I don't view it as, gee, we're having an election in a period of time. You know, everyone says, oh, I'm doing something before. No, the election, I can't think about that having to do with this. I think people are very impressed.
Is that messaging a mistake for President Trump, given that gas is above $5.50 in California?
Well, why is it above $5.50 in California to the Democrat policies? The other day,
and because of the war in Iran, Mr. Hilton, and because of the war in Iran.
Wait, okay,
gas has gone up about $1 since Joe Biden left office.
That's right, but it's $2 higher than the rest of the country because of Democrat policies. That's the part I can make a difference on. That's how we get to my plan. You can see it behind me of $3 gas. Just the other week, we filled up our campaign truck in Los Angeles. Back then, it was about $6.49. Next day, we're in Texas, $3.49. And the Iran war is taking place in a world where both of those prices exist. It's the gas tax in California, highest in the country, and the regulations driven by an environmental agenda that actually isn't even delivering results for the climate. So I think that's the point. Like, what can I affect as our next governor to bring gas prices down in California? There's a lot. We can bring it. Before the Iran war, you had 40 states in our country with gas $3 or below. I think California, with all our oil reserves that are not being used, should be one of them.
And would you support a gas tax if you were to be elected governor? Suspend a gas tax holiday, I should say. A gas tax holiday.
Oh, gas tax holiday. Well, yes, I will be calling on the legislature to do that. That's not something completely in my control. It's just gone up. This is the amazing thing. My opponent, Javier Becerra, is running around saying, oh, the affordability crisis is really bad. Democrats in the state legislature just increased the gas tax on July the 1st from 61 cents to over 63 cents. I think, what's going on? They're just gouging working people who are struggling, small business owners. And so I will be calling on the legislature to do that. By the way, in the primary, there were a number of the other Democrats running for governor who had the same position. So I do think that we'll be able to find some common ground on that after I'm elected.
Let me ask you about one of the chief criticisms from your opponent, who's seizing on your connection to President Trump. He said this in a statement to the Sacramento Bee, quote, "You can't fix the affordability crisis while carrying water for the man causing it." How do you respond to that argument by Javier Becerra?
It's laughable. Of course, we have the highest housing costs in the country, more than double the national average. Our electric bills are the highest everywhere except Hawaii, more than double the national average. They've doubled in the last 10 years. None of that has anything to do with President Trump. It's the Democrat policies that Javier Becerra 100% supports that have given us the highest cost of living in the country.
And
He
yet
was
you
asked the other day
acknowledge the
what he
Iran
would
war
say-
has sent prices up, right? I mean, I understand what you're saying, that they're higher in California, but all across the country, prices have gone up on gas, on oil.
That's no question. You can see that. But the question is, what can you do about the even higher costs here in California? For example, we have the highest grocery prices in the country. That, in large part, is driven by energy costs, both gas and diesel for transportation and electricity for stores and the whole supply chain. And so all of these things we can actually affect here in California. And that's what I'm focused on. Positive, pragmatic things that we can do here that command broad support so that we can just restore those basic things we used to think of as the California dream, a good job where you make enough to raise your family in a home of your own, in a safe neighborhood with a good school so your kids have a better life. We used to offer that here better than anywhere else, not just in America, but in the world. That's what I want to get us back to.
All right, Steve Hilton, thank you. Be safe. We will be following your race very closely. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Chris, and great to be with you.
Great to have you. Still to come, New York City Mayor Zohran Mamdani urges the federal government to arrest Israel's prime minister while he visits the city later this year. The panel's next, only on Meet the Press Now.
Benjamin Netanyahu is a war criminal, the architect of a horrific genocide against the Palestinian people. My administration has reviewed every avenue available under applicable law to determine whether New York City could execute the International Criminal Court's arrest warrant if Benjamin Netanyahu came here. It is clear that we do not have the independent legal authority to enforce this warrant. The federal government, however, does, and I call on them to join the ICC and execute this warrant.
Welcome back. New York City Mayor Zohran Mamdani is urging the federal government, as you just heard there, to arrest Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who's expected to be in New York in September for the annual UN General Assembly. The U.S. and Israel are not signatories of the International Criminal Court, but during his mayoral campaign, Mr. Mamdani repeatedly said he would order the New York City Police Department to arrest Prime Minister Netanyahu. The president already batting down the idea, posting on social media, quote, Benjamin Netanyahu will not be arrested in any way, shape, or form while in the United States of America. Joining me now is the panel, Shelby Talcott, White House correspondent at Semaphore, Antoine Seawright, Democratic strategist and CEO of Blueprint Strategy, and Carlos Curbelo, former Republican congressman from Florida and an NBC News contributor. Thanks to all of you for being here. Shelby, what do you think the strategy is here by Mayor Mamdani? Obviously, this has become a big rallying cry within the progressive branch of the Democratic Party, but he's also getting some pushback.
Yeah, I think it is exactly that. It is his sort of attempt to continue making his mark with that progressive brand of the Democratic Party. But I also think it's an attempt to get more involved in national politics, which is this is not the first time since he has become mayor that he has done so. And so it's not necessarily surprising to hear him say these things because we're seeing him get involved in sort of the broader national politics type arguments, but it does sort of draw a line in the sand, I think, for the Democratic Party as a whole, right? He is taking a very strong stance about Netanyahu, about Israel, and that has been a huge issue in the Democratic Party, and quite frankly, it's becoming an issue in the Republican Party as well.
Absolutely. Antoine, what do you make of this, how it's playing, and this notion that he is a mayor? Typically, when I'm interviewing a mayor, they say, I don't want to talk about international politics. This is a very different approach. And some on the left are saying this is actually a climb down from what he was guaranteeing on the campaign.
Well, I think three things. One, I think he's leaning into his authentic self because he campaigned in a very authentic way on this type issue. And I think he's leaning into that. Most people call it the follow-up. Number two, as the late Pastor Vernon Johns would say, pick a good fight and get into it. Netanyahu is a good fight for Mayor Mamdani and others who subscribe to his set of politics. I also think in politics, in this environment, you have to identify a boogeyman or a boogie woman. In this case, is Netanyahu, and I think that's smart for him to do that. I don't agree with his concept, but the other thing is I think he's asking for help. And sometimes when we ask for help, we think it has to be something that the opposition will agree on or the person we're asking for will agree on. But sometimes people just want to know you're fighting. I think he's asking for help.
But I do think it's a negative that he came out and said
repeatedly that he was going to arrest Netanyahu when a lot of people already knew that that was not going to happen, and now he has to kind of walk it back.
You're making an assumption that people who campaign or say things, that they can actually perform them. Donald Trump is living proof of that.
That's
how
true.
you campaign and how you govern are two different things.
Carlos?
So, Kristen, I think this is kind of a gift to Republicans because the mayor's looking out for himself, right? He made all these promises and set all these expectations for his political base. Meanwhile, Hakeem Jeffries, Chuck Schumer, they're out there trying to build broad tents ahead of the midterms, trying to include as many people as possible. Just this talk about arresting a foreign leader by a local official, it just seems really off message. Again, he's talking to his base. He's got his constituents, but congressional Democrats have other goals in mind.
Antoine, what about that? Is this a gift to Republicans, effectively?
No, because I think that Democrats who are focused on 218 are not focused on what the mayor of New York City is doing or saying. I think they're two different things. And that's why, from a congressional standpoint, particularly battleground map and math, you see a different type of conversation. They're laser focused on issues that matter to voters, like the things they're feeling on the affordability crisis.
Well, let's talk about another race where this is front and center, the Michigan Senate race. Shelby, my colleague Kelly O'Donnell spoke with Michigan Senate candidate Abdul Al-Sayed, and she really pushed him on this idea of how he would reach out to voters who he wants to support him in a general election, who oppose some of what Mayor Mamdani, for example, is saying. Take a listen.
But if you're victorious, how would you appeal to them for November?
Well, look, I have my principles, and I hope that they'd support the idea that, you know, we have a responsibility, I think, to uphold international law. So I think we can differentiate between Judaism and the Jewish people here and Israel and AIPAC there. And I hope that folks who recognize that we have a responsibility to take care of our problems here at home would recognize that, for me, it's about principle.
Congresswoman Haley Stevens, obviously a strong supporter of Israel. Is he extending an olive branch to her supporters in any way?
Depends on how you read it. I think probably no, right? Because he is sitting there saying, you know, this is how I think, and either you kind of accept that and understand where I'm coming from or don't vote for me, right? He's not changing his stance at all. He's not softening his language about Israel. He is essentially saying, this is me, take it or leave it. And so I don't think he's extending an olive branch. And again, it goes back to my earlier comments about just what a serious issue the topic of Israel has become, really, on both sides of the party. It is very polarizing.
It is a serious issue, and yet, Antoine, does this message allow him to win in a purple state like Michigan in November, if he were to win the primary?
If history is the best indicator, then absolutely not. But I think this style versus substance conversation we're having within the Democratic Party has come down to two things: how we talk about the issue and how we lean into the things we're passionate about. I think some on the progressive left feel like they need to jam their thinking down our throat, whereas a pragmatic leader like a Haley Stevens saying, you know what, I know what it is to win a tough seat. I also know what it means to work within a system to get it done and not necessarily burn it down. Two different approaches.
And I think one of the anchors that Republican candidates are dealing with, Carlos, of course, is the Iran war. I was just discussing this with Steve Hilton. The fact that gas prices are now up again over $4 a gallon. Oil prices went up again this week. There's a timeline factor here. And when you and I started having this conversation months ago, we were looking around this timeline as we kind of get closer to August as like things need to start coming down. How much concern is there, based on your conversations with your Republican colleagues, about the fact that prices are going up, that there's no end in sight to the war?
I was with a member today who's running in a swing district, and he just feels very frustrated, right? That this is kind of like a persistent dark cloud, on top of the country right now. And that's why I actually think that some of these episodes where the mayor of New York is talking about arresting a foreign leader is actually good for Republicans, because it does provide some bit of a distraction. And this whole thing reminds me of a Mitch McConnell in 2010 and his frustration with candidate quality. Some of these candidates are off message. They're talking almost exclusively to the Democratic base. that might be good for them personally, but I don't think it works out well for the party broadly. Republicans have fallen into this trap in the past.
Congressman, you have to crawl before you walk, and you have to consolidate your base if you want to have a chance of being competitive in a general election, as you know. And so I think we have to have some base consolidation activities and conversations. So you see that playing out.
All right, guys, great conversation all around. Thank you all so much for being here. Really appreciate it. Shelby, Antoine, and Carlos, thank you. And thank you for watching. We are back tomorrow with more Meet the Press Now. There is much more ahead on NBC News Now.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.